What's going on, guys? Matt with Carolina Coops, and I have waited a long time for this day. I'm going to show you guys something that I used to do years ago as an exterminator, and I am so happy to be able to do that same work, but now put it in to protect these chickens. If you've been following our videos, you've seen this place before. We have this beautiful custom home, and if we come right around this way, we got that beautiful custom goose house, and we got this beautiful custom chicken coop. And this all started with the chicken coop out in front of the kitchen window right there. And this beautiful, I'm not a gardener, so I'm sure there might be a special name for it, but this type of garden where the chickens are able to come out in free range. Well, here's what was happening here. We're deep down in southern Alabama, and I know everyone's got predators, but in this particular situation, there was heavy pressure of hawks. And one of the biggest problems when you are letting your chickens free range is daytime predators like hawks. So this particular customer, her first approach was to get some guardian geese, hence why we have a goose house, all right? And they do a pretty good job, but it's not a guaranteed system like what we ended up putting in, and that is this bird netting job. So she still lost a couple chickens due to hawks, and she started to do her own netting out here, which I think a lot of people can relate to. I'm sure a lot of people maybe even watch this video right now know exactly what I'm talking about, is putting some type of large net. This particular one was I think it was a 2-inch by 2-inch square. We came in and took a look at it, and the customer said, Matt, is there anything you can do to make this work a lot better? We have 3 gates that when the net was coming down, she was literally walking right into. And that had to be a nightmare. Every day coming in here, you got this beautiful courtyard, beautiful home, the coop, whatever, and you're fighting coming in here. So I knew right away, I said, we can absolutely solve that for you. We installed a 1-inch by 1-inch net that is a ultraviolet resistant, so will not rot from the sunlight. It is a type of nylon, so it's actually very, very strong. When we were doing live videos during this installation, a question we got is it plastic? And it is not plastic. I would never want to go through all this work that we went through and then install plastic net. This is a nylon net, very, very strong. But the first thing I cannot emphasize enough that we did differently right away is we went with a black net. This is just like the hardware cloth on our chicken coops. You want black because it absorbs the light and it's see-through. One of the things I was talking about yesterday is when you're walking through this courtyard area, you know, we got the lemon trees, we got plants, we got chickens, we got these beautiful structures. When you're walking around focusing on these things, you forget that this net is here, and that was the whole objective. We didn't want to show off this large canopy to protect the chickens. We wanted it to really disappear, and I can tell you, I think we absolutely accomplished that, and that had a lot to do with it being black. The other thing, how we accomplished it, is going into the basics of bird netting. We had to dig down and set all these posts, these metal posts, into the ground. We concreted every single one. We wanted to take advantage of our existing fence, mainly because I was worried about the enormous tension that we knew we were going to put on the net, that these posts were going to start bowing in. So I wanted to use as much support as I could from the existing wooden posts, but it definitely posed a huge problem because this fence was not straight. A lot of the posts were not plumb, so we had to really constantly find the sweet spots so that it did look good when you're starting to sight down all your posts, and we knew that was going to be nice and square. And we actually went up 12 foot, so we have a nice high canopy. And because we're up so high is another reason why it just disappears when you're inside here. The other thing is, after all the posts are set, we put in the top rail, which is also metal, and then we had to go around roughly, we divided it up evenly because every situation was a little bit different, but roughly 12 to 16 inches with all the eye bolts, okay? And so we had to drill through all the poles, put in these special eye bolts that go all the way through, and they nut on the backside, and then run this galvanized cable everywhere. Anywhere a net was going to terminate, we had to run this cable so we had something to terminate to. And what makes doing a bird job like this is if you don't have this cable in, it's almost impossible to do two things. One, to secure every little nook and cranny so a hawk can't get in. But again, to make it disappear, you gotta get it tight. Well, in order to get it tight, you gotta pull against this cable that has to be real tight. And how we make the cable real tight, it's called a turnbuckle. So we have aluminum ferrules that we use to crimp onto the wire so that it'll never slip. And then you just turn that turnbuckle and it tightens this steel cable. And then the final step is you put your net out, and then every inch all the way around here, I forgot the number, I think it was like maybe 5,000 hog rings going around, hog ringing every single square so it's nice and even, and it, you know, makes that enormous tension that this net is under. It distributes that weight on every square instead of just pulling on a couple squares, which if you were to do that, it'll definitely rip. It's a very simple system, but it does take a lot of work. It is worth it because, again, you've got to get the net tight. If you don't get the net tight, you're gonna do a couple things. One, you're gonna see it even more, but number two, that's also gonna make it, if a predator is trying to get in, it makes it a little bit easier. And actually, speaking of that, major disclaimer, this netting system is not meant to keep bears out, raccoons, coyotes. It's not meant to keep the larger predators out like our chicken coops do. This is only meant for aerial predators like hawks. Now, the other thing that I really liked about this particular situation, because she did have this beautiful existing fence, and she already had this 2" by 4" fencing material in. And what was nice about that is, one, we didn't have to go all the way down with the net. This is still small enough to keep the hawks out, but we have this top of the fence wire already in place, and we were able to just hog ring, again, every inch all the way around. We did have to staple the fence down to the rails so that, you know, when that tension got on, we weren't pulling the fence up. That way we're not having open spots along the bottom. Every situation is different, and you really, it takes an art to really be able to see all these different structures and say, how am I gonna make sure I run a cable along that building structure so it stays tight? And truth be told, when I did this as an exterminator, I wasn't out in a large open area. I was always underneath a structure that had existing material like I-beams and wood and whatnot, and we would just go in and screw in the eye bolts or shoot in multi-brackets, whatever. We didn't have that in this case. Here's why we had to put these poles in the top rail, but we're also going around her chicken coop, her goose house, going around these beautiful beams around the kind of the breezeway here, and going above her kitchen window. We had to make sure that that wire stayed nice and tight so that the net didn't pull that out so far that it caused an open spot. So I want to show you right here, we ended up just taking some of the top rail, putting all the eye bolts in, and then screwing it to the roof so that we could run that cable through, and again, pull that net tight to that so we didn't have any bowing up there. And my favorite part, and this is, truth be told, was freaking me out the most, I was very stressed, is how are we gonna go around the goose house so it looks neat? And we ended up just taking more of that top rail and just bringing in two lateral poles, two lateral rails, and then going up the 12-12 pitch of the roof, and then getting real creative with these terminals for the rails where we ganged up 3 of them and just made it so, again, have a place to run the wire. That's all we were trying to do. So here's the other thing I wanted to show you guys that I'm very, very proud of, because again, I didn't know exactly how we were gonna accomplish what we accomplished. I just know from years of doing custom work, we'll figure it out. And that is talking about these gates. Again, earlier I mentioned when the customer would come through her gates, I kid you not, she would have to open up the gate and literally duck and almost duck walk in and then come up into the canopy area. I wanted to solve that problem for her. And how we did it is we had to take her existing gates and cut out a couple of the rails and be able to screw in our top rail pipe that in this case went vertical. And we got this also 1" by 1", and I can't remember what gauge this is. It was literally an 1/8 inch thick. That's also PVC coated. It's very, very rigid. I didn't want to run a cable here and then put a net in. I thought that would look cheesy. And the other thing that I love a lot is you'll notice on other parts of her home, she has this beautiful arch, okay, that we have definitely incorporated into, you know, you look at that transom window above the goose door, that window up there. Evan did an amazing job incorporating that arch. And also right here, if we can get a good shot of the front of her penthouse with those arch doors inside there. I wanted to incorporate that arch. So we got a tube roller, brought it all the way down here. We rolled this to match it. We put a top rail that terminated into both the stationary posts, and then did the same thing for the door area so that it functions. You walk in, you got a 12-foot ceiling, and it completely seals this up, keeping the hawks out. It was really that simple. We did have to get creative and figure out how to reuse her existing hardware that I absolutely love. It's like a hand-forged hardware, but in order for the gates to be able to close enough so that hawks can't get in, we actually had to take the gates and move them all the way out flush to the outside of the posts. Let's just say that made it tricky. So the other thing that was driving me nuts, and I know it's driving the customer nuts, is the T-hinges that were originally on these gates. Actually, they weren't even T-hinges, they were actually mortise hinges. Not the type of hinge you want to use on a gate, especially this big. The screws were going into the end grain. They're very sloppy. They give you no room for adjustment. We had our friend out in Cedar Mountain, North Carolina, Charles Kelvin Design, who did that wonderful weather vane on a custom coupe we did out in Cedar Mountain. We gave him a call, asked him, hey, can you make us some custom T-hinges for a job out here in Alabama? He said, absolutely. Got them out right away. Did an amazing job. These things, they might look big, and actually they are big, and they're meant to be big. When you're using big old T-hinges, you actually, from a design perspective, want to use up half of the gate or the door. But I wanted to make sure these gates never ever sag on the customer. So we went with 1/8-inch steel, very heavy duty. There's even a grease fitting on the hinge mechanism here, and they're all bolted into the post and into the rail of the gate. So just worked out beautifully. They look great. The gate is never going to sag, and it's going to last forever. So again, Charles, great job there. Now, also, I wanted to give you guys a quick close-up. The system we're talking about. Basically, again, you have to create a fixed border that you're going to attach the cable to. So again, we went in with the gate posts and went roughly every 12 to 16 inches with the eye bolts so that we could run this galvanized cable through all the eye bolts. And then you terminate the cable at one end, come all the way over to here, terminate the cable to the end of the turnbuckle, hook the turnbuckle on, tighten that turnbuckle really nice and tight, gets this cable nice and tight so that you can pull the net nice and tight, and then you hog ring every single square. And that's what makes this net look so well and literally almost disappear from your view when you're not actually looking at it. So that is the system. And I can't emphasize enough, it's really not complicated. I've seen a lot of people try to put in bird nets to help protect their chickens, and I get it. It can be challenging until you understand there's a lot of work that needs to go into before you can even hang your net. And if you don't do that work, you're gonna fail at installing that bird net. It's just not gonna look good and probably most likely not be effective. But if you take the time like we did, go through everywhere, putting in all the posts and rails, putting in all the eye bolts, putting in the cables and the turnbuckles so that when you go to put your net in, you can really get it nice and tight and hog ring it. And that's kind of where I want to finish off. One of the areas I was concerned about, because I was mentioning earlier, we might have some flex on these posts, which is why we went with real big posts and concreted them in the ground. What I didn't want to do, and I kept planting the seed, warning the customer, if it doesn't go as planned, we might have to put a pole in the middle. And there's nothing wrong with putting a pole in the middle and doing that kind of canopy effect, if you will. But this worked out exactly like how it used to back in the old days, is we were able to pull this net so tight that it's not sagging at all. All right, and again, that is what just makes it look so good, and it disappears. Now, one of the disadvantages, I can already hear my YouTube chicken police out there. Well, what about all the leaves that are gonna fall on it? Absolutely, okay? There is no perfect system. And luckily we're down here in Alabama where it hardly ever snows, but they can get hurricanes. They might be able to get ice, or an ice storm or something like that. But the most common thing I've told the customer you want to worry about in a situation like this is when your leaves do start to fall and they land on the net, on a day that maybe the wind in this particular situation maybe is blowing out of the north, heading south, and you want all the leaves to go over there, come in with a leaf blower and just blow the leaves off. You're only going to have to do it maybe a couple times when the leaves fall. Right now, we're in the beginning of November, and I don't even see the leaves changing yet, but I'm sure it happens sooner or later. But that is something you do have to worry about. So I'll tell you what, guys, I mean, that is pretty much all I wanted to show you in this video. Is something that I used to love doing as an exterminator. I love that we get to do it now to protect chickens. It is something I want to do a lot more of. If you have watched this video and you're like, oh my gosh, man, I could definitely use this type of system, give us a call. We'll be more than happy to come out. I don't care where you live. We go all around the planet. We can come anywhere and install a bird system just like this to protect your chickens from aerial predators. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, leave them down below. We always like to hear from you. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that notification bell wherever that is. Make sure you're a subscriber on our YouTube channel. You're following us on Instagram and maybe on Facebook. It's not quite what it used to be, but I don't care. Make sure you go and follow us wherever we need to be seen so that you know all the new videos that are coming up. We'll see you next time. Later.